Three young cheerleaders vanished after a competition in 1997, leaving their families in agony. But 15 years later, a logger working in the woods finds something that makes his blood run cold. The autumn of 1997 in Kirkland, Washington, had the kind of chill that seeped through your clothes, but the atmosphere inside Eastlake High School's gymnasium crackled with electricity. 16-year-old Gabriela Vasquez launched her body into the air in a perfect pike position, while her best friends, Amber Wilson and Sarah Miller, held steady in the base of the human pyramid. Coach Benjamin Hartman applauded enthusiastically as the three girls completed the maneuver with millimeter precision. "That's why we qualified for Portland, ladies. Now one more time," Hartman shouted through his megaphone, while all 18 members of the Eastlake Wolves cheer squad took deep breaths for another repetition. To any observer, the three friends were inseparable. Gabriela, with her curly hair always tied in a high ponytail, was the most extroverted. The daughter of Mexican immigrants, she spoke with her hands and smiled as if each day were a celebration. Amber, blonde with piercing blue eyes, was the strategist of the group, meticulous, disciplined, and relentlessly competitive. Sarah, with her light brown shoulder-length hair, was the most reserved, observing the world with analytical eyes behind a shyness that completely disappeared during performances. United since 6th grade, when Gabriela defended Sarah from a group of girls who mocked her braces, the three had transformed their dream of competing nationally into a concrete goal. The Northwest Regional Championship in Portland was the first step toward nationals, and no one at Eastlake High doubted they would succeed. "They're like clockwork gears," Diana Miller, Sarah's mother, commented to Patricia Vasquez during one of the practices. "When one moves, the others follow in perfect synchrony." On Thursday before the competition, October 9th, the three were at the Wilson home packing their reserve uniforms, the red and white ones with the silver-embroidered Wolves logo. Robert Wilson, Amber's father, filmed the girls while his wife Karen prepared sandwiches in the kitchen. "And what will you do when you win the trophy?" Robert asked, focusing the camcorder on the teenagers. "Disney World," Gabriela shouted, laughing. "Full college scholarship," Amber corrected, always practical. "I just want everyone in Kirkland to be proud of us," Sarah said softly. Later that evening, as darkness fell over the suburban neighborhood, the three friends sprawled across sleeping bags on Amber's bedroom floor. The walls around them were covered with competition medals, team photos, and a large calendar with the Portland competition dates circled in red marker. "Do you think we'll really make it to nationals?" Sarah whispered, twirling a strand of hair around her finger. Amber sat up, her expression serious in the dim light. "We're not just going to make it to nationals, we're going to win. I've calculated everything. Our routine scores 15% higher on technical difficulty than our closest regional competitors." Gabriela rolled onto her stomach, propping her chin on her hands. "My tia Maria says she saw it in a dream, three wolves running together, reaching the top of a mountain." "Your Aunt Maria also predicted it would snow last July," Amber teased, but she was smiling. The next morning, Friday dawned crisp and bright. Gabriela stood in her family's modest living room, wrapped in her father's tight embrace. Juan Vasquez, his work clothes already on, held his daughter's face between calloused hands. "You bring home that trophy, mi niña," he said, his accent thick with emotion. "I will be working, but my heart travels with you." "Te prometo, papa," Gabriela replied, fighting back tears. "I'll make you proud." At 7:30, the school parking lot buzzed with activity. Two yellow school buses waited with engines running as cheerleaders, coaches, and parent chaperones loaded equipment and luggage. Coach Hartman stood with his clipboard, checking names and inventory. "Palms? Loaded," called a sophomore girl. "Medical kit." "Right here, coach," responded the team manager. "Reserve uniforms?" "In the van," Amber answered crisply. The energy was palpable as parents hugged their daughters goodbye. Patricia Vasquez stood slightly apart from the other parents, her English limited, but her pride unmistakable as she watched Gabriela board the bus. Inside, the three friends claimed their usual spot in the back. Amber immediately put on her Walkman headphones, closing her eyes to mentally rehearse their routine. Sarah opened a dog-eared paperback, while Gabriella pressed her face against the window, waving enthusiastically as the buses pulled away. "See you Sunday with our trophy," she called to her mother, though the window was closed and Patricia couldn't hear her words. 3 hours later, the buses stopped at a roadside diner for lunch. The team spilled out, stretching legs cramped from sitting. Gabriella pulled a disposable camera from her backpack, insisting on capturing every moment. "Come on, get together," she directed, backing up to frame Amber and Sarah in front of the diner's neon sign. "This is the beginning of our championship journey." Sarah smiled shyly, while Amber struck a dramatic pose, both humoring their friend's enthusiasm. The camera flashed, freezing the moment. 3 teenage girls on the precipice of something they believed would be wonderful. By mid-afternoon, the buses arrived at the Hilton Portland downtown. The team gathered in the elegant lobby, awestruck by the crystal chandeliers and marble floors. Coach Hartman distributed room key cards while explaining the weekend schedule. "Room 407 for you 3, he said, handing a card to Amber. "Remember, curfew is 9 o'clock tonight. We have practice at 7 tomorrow morning." That evening, as darkness settled over Portland, the 3 friends sprawled across the beds in room 407, still in their travel clothes. Gabriella sat cross-legged behind Sarah, deftly braiding her hair while MTV played quietly on the television. Amber stood by the window, mentally rehearsing their routine, her lips moving silently as she counted beats. "This time tomorrow, we'll have done our preliminary performance," Sarah said, wincing slightly as Gabriella tugged on a tangle. "And we'll crush it," Amber replied without turning from the window. "I've calculated our odds against every team in our division. We're statistically superior in technical elements." Gabriella tied off Sarah's braid with a red elastic. "Always with the statistics, Amber. Sometimes you have to trust in here," she tapped her chest. "Not just in here," she tapped her temple. Amber finally turned, her expression softening. "I do trust us. We've worked harder than anyone." As the night deepened and the lights dimmed in room 407, Sarah stared at the ceiling, listening to her friend's steady breathing. A strange feeling of significance washed over her, a premonition she couldn't name but felt in her bones. "Have you ever thought," she whispered into the darkness, "that tomorrow might be the day that changes our lives forever?" Neither Amber nor Gabriella answered, both already drifting toward sleep, unaware of how terribly prophetic those words would prove to be. Gabriella jolted awake at 6:15 Saturday morning, Sarah's words about life-changing days echoing in her mind. Through the gap in the hotel curtains, Portland's skyline was barely visible in the pre-dawn light. She lay still for a moment, listening to her friend's breathing, suddenly struck by a strange feeling of significance. "Time to get up, wolves," she whispered, reaching over to gently shake Amber's shoulder. Amber's eyes snapped open immediately, alert without transition. "I was already awake," she claimed, though the imprint of the pillow on her cheek suggested otherwise. "Sarah, come on. Coach wants us downstairs in 45 minutes." At 7:30, the 3 friends sat in the hotel restaurant, surrounded by their teammates. While other girls chatted excitedly about the competition ahead, Amber methodically spread a thin layer of butter on a single piece of toast, her only breakfast. "You need more than that," Gabriella admonished, pushing her plate of scrambled eggs toward her friend. "You can't perform on empty." Amber shook her head firmly. "I've calculated my optimal performance weight. Water and toast is all I need before competition." Sarah, quietly observing while sipping orange juice, spoke up. "Coach says dehydration is the biggest enemy of precision. At least drink a full glass." 2 hours later, the girls gathered in the arena's bustling locker room. The air was thick with hairspray and nervous energy as dozens of cheerleading squads prepared for the preliminary rounds. Gabriella stood in front of a mirror, expertly gathering her wild curls into the signature high ponytail that would become part of their unified team look. "Hold still," she instructed Sarah, who sat on a bench while Gabriella applied glitter to her cheekbones. "You need to sparkle under those lights." Nearby, Amber methodically stretched, counting under her breath, her face a mask of concentration. When she finally stood to put on her uniform, Sarah caught a glimpse of her friend's expression in the mirror. determination mixed with a vulnerability rarely seen on Amber's face. "Wolves together," Sarah said softly, meeting Amber's eyes in the reflection. "Wolves forever," Amber and Gabriella responded in unison, their pre-performance ritual complete. At 2:15 that afternoon, the Eastlake Wolves took their positions on the blue competition mat. As the announcer called their name, Gabriella felt the familiar rush of adrenaline, the nervousness transforming instantly into focused energy. The music began, a carefully edited mix of pop and hip-hop, and 18 bodies moved as one. For 2 minutes and 30 seconds, nothing existed outside their routine. When Gabriella was launched into her pike position, time seemed to slow, allowing her to spot Amber and Sarah below, their faces upturned, ready to catch her. The landing was flawless, the crowd's reaction immediate. "That was our best run yet," Coach Hartman declared, embracing the girls as they exited the performance area. His usually stern face broke into a rare, wide smile. "Now we wait." The team gathered in their designated area, watching other squads perform while anxiously awaiting results. When Eastlake was announced as one of the 8 teams advancing to Sunday's finals, the celebration was jubilant but brief. Coach Hartman immediately gathered them for a strategy session. That evening, back in room 407, the victory's excitement gave way to focused preparation. Amber lay on the floor, methodically working through leg stretches. Sarah sat cross-legged on her bed, notebook open, analyzing what she considered their routine's weak points. "The transition between the pyramid and the tumbling sequence needs to be tighter," she murmured, making notes. "We lost at least 3/10 of a point there." Gabriella, sitting by the window with the hotel phone pressed to her ear, spoke rapidly in Spanish, updating her parents about their success. "Sí, mamá, estamos en las finales. Sí, mañana. Te quiero también." Sunday morning arrived with a pale sun breaking through Portland's characteristic clouds. The team gathered for their final rehearsal in one of the hotel's conference rooms, Coach Hartman making last-minute adjustments to maximize their score. "Tighten that formation," he instructed, watching critically as the girls moved through their routine without music. "Gabriella, higher on that jump. Amber, sharper motions. Sarah, keep your smile consistent through the difficult sections." By 3:30 that afternoon, the Eastlake Wolves were back on the competition mat for their final performance. The arena was packed, the energy electric. As the music began, Gabriella caught a glimpse of Patricia Vasquez in the stands, clutching her purse tightly, lips moving in what Gabriella knew was a prayer. The routine unfolded perfectly. Every jump, every toss, every formation executed with precision that came from hundreds of hours of practice. When the final pose hit, with Gabriella at the pyramid's top, arms forming a perfect V, the crowd erupted. The team gathered anxiously at the awards ceremony, holding hands in a tight circle. When Eastlake was announced as the second-place finisher, securing a spot at the national semifinals in Dallas, the girls' screams nearly drowned out the announcer's voice. "We did it!" Gabriella exclaimed, jumping up and down, tears streaming down her face as Coach Hartman accepted the silver trophy. "We're going to nationals!" The celebration continued through dinner at the hotel restaurant, where Coach Hartman stood to make an emotional toast. "To my extraordinary Wolves," he said, voice cracking slightly. "You've shown what dedication and teamwork can accomplish. Dallas won't know what hit them." By 9:45 that night, the adrenaline still coursed through their veins as the 3 friends lounged in their hotel room, still wearing their team sweats, the silver trophy sitting on the dresser. "I'm still hungry," Amber admitted, surprising her friends. That pasta wasn't enough after all that exertion. Gabriella jumped up, suddenly energized. "Let's go to that convenience store we passed yesterday. I want soda and chips to celebrate." "Is that allowed?" Sarah hesitated, always mindful of rules. "We'll tell Mrs. Delgado," Gabriella assured her. "It's only 2 blocks away. We'll be back in 20 minutes. At 10:05, the 3 girls stood in the hotel lobby, explaining their plan to Mrs. Delgado, a parent chaperone who sat reading a magazine. "Be back in 30 minutes, girls," she warned, checking her watch. The bus leaves early tomorrow. Security cameras captured the three teenagers exiting the hotel lobby at 10:07, all wearing school sweatshirts, laughing as Gabriella performed an exaggerated imitation of a rival coach's serious expression. "Stop it," Sarah giggled, playfully pushing Gabriella's shoulder. "Someone might see you." "Who cares?" Gabriella replied, skipping backward a few steps. "We're going to Nationals, baby." A hotel employee taking a smoke break near the service entrance vaguely remembered seeing the three walking toward the direction of the 7-Eleven 2 blocks away, still laughing and talking animatedly. At 11:15, Mrs. Delgado knocked on the door of room 407, frowning when no answer came. By 11:30, concern growing, she used the master key provided by reception and found the room empty, the girls' bags sitting untouched on their beds. Amber's flip phone was charging on the nightstand, its small green light blinking with unread messages. At midnight, as panic spread through the hotel, and parents frantically searched every corridor and stairwell, a security guard made a disturbing discovery in the parking lot. The school's minivan had its side door slightly ajar, and on the floor lay 3 Eastlake Wolves team jackets, abandoned as if they had been dropped in haste. The security guard stared at the abandoned jackets in the minivan, a chill running down his spine that had nothing to do with the October night air. "Mr. Hartman," he called out, his voice echoing across the parking structure. "You need to see this." Coach Hartman rushed over, his face already pale with worry. Behind him followed Robert Wilson, whose usual composed demeanor had crumbled into barely contained panic. The sight of the 3 discarded team jackets, one with Vasquez embroidered across the back, made his knees buckle. "These were in their bags," he whispered. "They packed them for tomorrow's trip home." At 17 minutes past midnight, Coach Hartman stood in the hotel lobby, hands trembling as he dialed the Portland Police Department. Around him, the scene had descended into chaos. Cheerleaders in pajamas huddled together crying, parent chaperones frantically calling other parents, hotel staff searching service areas. "Yes, 3 teenage girls," Hartman spoke into the receiver, his voice cracking. "Missing for over 2 hours now. They were just going to the convenience store. No, they don't have a history of running away. These are responsible kids." Officer David Morris arrived at the Hilton Portland downtown at 45 minutes past midnight, walking into what looked like a crisis command center forming in the lobby. Parents clutched photographs of their daughters, while teenagers huddled in small groups, many in tears. Morris, a veteran officer with 15 years on the force, immediately recognized the seriousness of the situation. "When exactly did anyone last see them?" he asked, notebook ready as he interviewed Coach Hartman. "Our security cameras show them exiting at 10:07, volunteered the night manager, a thin man with worried eyes. "They were laughing, looked completely normal." At 1:20 in the morning, during an inspection of the hotel parking structure, Frank Donovan, the security guard who had found the jackets, called out again. "The side door was definitely closed earlier when I did my rounds at 9:30, he explained to Officer Morris, pointing to the minivan's slightly ajar door. "And these jackets weren't here." Morris radioed for forensic assistance, carefully avoiding touching anything in or around the vehicle. "No signs of struggle," he noted, shining his flashlight across the van's interior. "Just the jackets, like they were dropped or pulled off." Patricia Vasquez pushed through the growing crowd in the lobby, her eyes wild with fear. When the hotel manager showed her the security footage of Gabriella and her friends leaving the hotel, Patricia's legs gave way. She collapsed to the floor with a wail that needed no translation, a mother's anguish transcending language barriers. Karen Wilson, herself barely holding together, knelt beside her, arms encircling Patricia's shaking shoulders. "Señor, mi niña, por favor, encuentre a mi niña," Patricia begged, clutching Officer Morris's arm when he returned to the lobby. The desperation in her grip communicated what her English couldn't. At 2:30 in the morning, Detective Marcus Reynolds arrived, immediately transforming the hotel's main conference room into an investigation headquarters. Tall and serious, with salt and pepper hair and methodical movements, Reynolds had handled dozens of missing persons cases throughout his career. He pinned 3 school photographs to an improvised bulletin board: Gabriella's brilliant smile, Amber's confident pose, Sarah's shy half-smile. "We need to cover a 10-block radius immediately," Reynolds instructed the officers who had joined him. "Check every alley, dumpster, business surveillance camera. These girls have been missing for over 4 hours in a city they don't know." In the pre-dawn darkness, officers with flashlights swept through the neighborhoods surrounding the hotel. The beam of light from Officer Peterson's torch illuminated shop doorways, alley corners, and the spaces between parked cars. Each officer carried copies of the girls' photographs, ready to show to any late-night pedestrians they encountered. As Monday's first light broke over Portland, Juan Vasquez's truck screeched into the hotel parking lot. He had driven through the night after Patricia's frantic call, his work clothes still covered in construction dust. He ran into the lobby and swept his sobbing wife into his arms, rapid Spanish flowing between them as they clung to each other. "My daughter is responsible, disciplined," Juan told Detective Reynolds an hour later, his English careful and precise despite his exhaustion. "She would never just disappear. Something happened to her, to all of them." At 9:30 that morning, Reynolds spread a detailed map of downtown Portland across the conference table. Red pins marked the hotel, the convenience store, and the location of the minivan. Blue lines traced the most likely walking route the girls would have taken. "The 7-Eleven has security cameras," Reynolds explained to the parents gathered around the table. "We'll be reviewing that footage as soon as they open." Robert Wilson hunched over his laptop in the corner, repeatedly playing the convenience store's grainy surveillance video that police had obtained by mid-morning. The footage showed the 3 girls entering at 14 minutes past 10, laughing and selecting snacks from the shelves. They paid and exited at 19 minutes past 10, Gabriella holding the door for her friends. "This is the last confirmed sighting," Wilson muttered, eyes bloodshot from lack of sleep and endless viewing of the same 20 seconds of footage. After this, they just vanished. At 2:30 that afternoon, a search team combing through trash receptacles found Gabriella's wallet in a garbage can 5 blocks from the hotel, in the opposite direction from the convenience store. Detective Reynolds carefully examined it while wearing latex gloves, noting that her student ID remained inside, along with $20 in cash. "If this was a robbery, why leave the money?" questioned Dave Cromwell, the sheriff from Kirkland who had arrived to assist with the investigation. "And if the girls ditched the wallet themselves, why only Gabriella's?" As Monday evening approached, the first news vans appeared outside the hotel. The Portland Tribune ran a front-page story about 3 cheerleaders vanish after competition victory, while local radio stations broadcast descriptions of the girls and their last known whereabouts. The hotel's conference room transformed further as FBI agent Kathleen Morse arrived Tuesday evening, bringing with her a team of federal investigators and specialized equipment. Tall and authoritative with short auburn hair, Morse took command of the room immediately. "We've recovered traffic camera footage from the area," she announced to the exhausted families and local law enforcement. "There's something you need to see." On the screen, grainy night vision footage showed a street corner 2 blocks from the 7-Eleven. A man in what appeared to be a security uniform stood talking to 3 teenage girls. The timestamp read 27 minutes past 10. The next frame, from a different angle, showed what looked like the same 3 girls being helped into the back of a dark-colored van. "The driver appears to be wearing some type of uniform," Morse explained, her voice grave. "And our enhancement team believes at least 2 of the passengers may be unconscious or immobile in the back seat." The grainy surveillance footage left everyone in the conference room stunned into silence. Patricia Vasquez crossed herself, whispering a prayer as tears streamed down her face. Karen Wilson gripped her husband's hand so tightly that her knuckles turned white. "This is now officially a suspected abduction," Agent Morse declared, her voice cutting through the heavy silence. "We're implementing full FBI kidnapping protocols, effective immediately." By Wednesday morning, Agent Morse had transformed the hotel conference room into a sophisticated command center. 8 FBI agents worked at laptops arranged in a horseshoe formation, while wall-mounted screens displayed maps, timelines, and enhanced images from the traffic cameras. Our technical analysts are working to identify the vehicle, Morse explained to the assembled families and local law enforcement. The partial plate visible in the footage gives us something to work with. The agent, trim and efficient in her navy pantsuit, moved with the focused energy of someone who had handled dozens of similar cases. Her auburn hair was cut in a practical bob that required minimal maintenance. Her only concession to personal style, a small silver wolf pin on her lapel. A coincidence that Patricia Vasquez had tearfully pointed out earlier that morning. The uniform the suspect is wearing appears to be security-related, Morse continued, pointing to an enhanced still image. We're compiling a list of all security personnel who worked at the championship event or nearby venues. By Thursday afternoon, roadblocks had been established on major routes connecting Portland to Seattle. Officers showed photographs of the 3 girls to drivers, while FBI agents distributed flyers at bus stations, airports, and train terminals across the Pacific Northwest. Inside the hotel, a growing media presence necessitated regular press briefings. Detective Reynolds and Agent Morse stood side by side before a forest of microphones in the hotel's smaller conference room, carefully controlling what information was released to protect the integrity of the investigation. These are 3 responsible, high-achieving teenagers with no history of running away, Reynolds emphasized to the reporters. Gabriela Vasquez, Amber Wilson, and Sarah Miller were last seen on Sunday evening. They are not just statistics. They are daughters, friends, and valued members of their community. Behind the podium, large photographs of the girls smiled out at the cameras, official school portraits that would soon appear on television screens across the country. The parents watched the broadcast from their hotel rooms, the strange disconnection of seeing their daughters transformed into news stories, adding another layer to their nightmare. They keep talking about them in the past tense, Karen Wilson whispered, hugging Amber's teddy bear to her chest. Why are they using the past tense? At 7:15 Thursday evening, Agent Morse sat across from Jason Landis in a small interview room at Portland Police Headquarters. Landis, a temporary security guard hired for the championship event, had failed to report for work on Monday and had become an immediate person of interest. I was in the emergency room all Sunday night, Landis insisted, sliding a hospital admission form across the table. Appendicitis. They operated at midnight. Morse's face revealed nothing as she examined the document, but internally she felt the familiar disappointment of a promising lead dissolving. The timing made it impossible for Landis to have been the uniformed man in the surveillance footage. While the FBI pursued leads in Portland, the Kirkland community mobilized in support of the families. The following weekend, 3 buses carrying volunteers arrived from Kirkland, each person wearing a T-shirt bearing the girls' photographs. They fanned out across downtown Portland, distributing flyers and asking questions in shops, restaurants, and parks. Pastor Michael Davis from Kirkland's Community Church led the volunteer effort, organizing search teams and providing updates to those who couldn't make the trip. These girls are part of our family, he told a local reporter. Kirkland doesn't abandon its own. Back at FBI headquarters, forensic technicians meticulously examined the jackets found in the minivan. Under specialized lighting, they searched for fibers, hair, skin cells, anything that might identify who had touched them besides the girls. The absence of evidence is itself significant, remarked the lead technician, a 30-year veteran named Dr. Patel. No struggle marks, no tears in the fabric. It's as if they simply took them off and placed them there. Monday marked 1 full week since the disappearance. Juan Vasquez sat on the edge of his hotel bed, his weathered face lined with exhaustion as he hung up the phone. Patricia looked up from her rosary beads, immediately recognizing the expression on her husband's face. "They fired you?" she asked in Spanish, her voice hollow. Juan nodded slowly. 3 strikes without notice. They said they're sorry about Gabriela, but they need reliable workers. The Wilson and Miller families faced their own struggles. Karen and Robert methodically walked Portland's downtown each day, approaching strangers with Amber's photo. Diana Miller, utilizing her experience as a teacher, visited youth shelters with Sarah's picture, while Edward Miller coordinated with local search volunteers. At 3:30 Monday afternoon, Agent Morse received confirmation of Jason Landis's alibi. Security footage from Providence Portland Medical Center clearly showed him being admitted through the emergency room at 9:47 Sunday night, clutching his side in pain. "We're back to square one with identifying our uniformed suspect," Morse told her team, frustration evident in her clipped tone. 10 days after the disappearance, a national press conference was arranged. The parents, exhausted and emotionally drained, took turns speaking directly to the cameras. Robert Wilson, once imposing in his banker's suits, now looked diminished in clothes that hung loosely on his frame. "Amber, if you can hear this, we're looking for you," he said, voice breaking. "We won't stop until we find you." Diana Miller, her hands trembling as she held Sarah's photograph, could barely speak above a whisper. Edward stood protectively beside her, completing her sentences when emotion overwhelmed her. Patricia Vasquez, with the assistance of an interpreter, spoke directly to the cameras in rapid Spanish, her words carrying the raw emotion that transcended language barriers. "Mi Gabriela es mi corazón, mi vida," she said, tears streaming down her face. "Por favor, devuélvanme a mi hija." 3 weeks after the disappearance, when the searches began losing intensity and some families from the cheerleading team had returned to Kirkland, the phone in the command center rang late at night. Agent Morse answered, listening intently as her posture straightened. "We might have something," she announced to the few agents still working. A waitress at a roadside diner in Tacoma claims she served 3 teenagers matching Gabriella, Amber, and Sarah's descriptions. They apparently fled when she mentioned recognizing them as those missing cheerleaders. The command center erupted into immediate action. Agent Morse dispatched 4 FBI agents to the Tacoma diner while instructing local police to secure the location and preserve any potential evidence. Within the hour, Robert Wilson and Juan Vasquez were speeding north on Interstate 5, hope rekindling for the first time in weeks. At the Blue Plate Diner just off Highway 16, waitress Jenny Roper showed agents the booth where the 3 girls had sat. "The blonde one had dyed her hair brown, but I recognized her eyes from the news," she explained, pointing to the window table. "When I asked if they were those missing cheerleaders, they just threw money on the table and ran out." Forensic technicians carefully collected fingerprints from water glasses, utensils, and the vinyl booth seats. Security footage from the diner's single camera showed 3 teenage girls entering at 6:42 that evening, their faces partially obscured by hooded sweatshirts. The video quality was poor, but their heights and builds appeared consistent with Gabriella, Amber, and Sarah. By dawn, the Vasquez family had arrived in Tacoma, setting up an impromptu command post in a motel across from the diner. Patricia distributed Spanish-language flyers throughout the nearby predominantly Latino neighborhood, while Juan spoke with local construction workers, showing Gabriella's photo on his worn wallet. 2 days later, their fragile hope shattered. Agent Morse arrived at their motel room, her expression conveying the news before she spoke. "The fingerprints came back," she said gently. "They belonged to 3 students from Olympia High School who were skipping school. They ran because they thought they'd be reported for truancy." Juan Vasquez's shoulders collapsed as if bearing an unbearable weight. In broken English, he whispered, "I thought God had answered our prayers." By the end of October, with no substantial leads, most of the FBI resources had been redirected from Portland. Agent Morse maintained a small team in Seattle, but the command center at the hotel was dismantled, case files transferred to regional headquarters. The cheerleaders and their families had long since returned to Kirkland, where red ribbons adorned every tree along the main corridor of Eastlake High School. In the empty gymnasium where the cheer squad once practiced, Coach Hartman sat alone on the bleachers, staring at the space where his team used to perform. The once energetic man now moved like someone twice his age, shoulders permanently hunched forward as if carrying an invisible burden. They were going to be national champions, he told Principal Matthews, who had found him sitting there after school hours. I keep thinking about what I could have done differently that night. The Wilson home had transformed subtly in Amber's absence. Karen spent hours in her daughter's bedroom, organizing and reorganizing the closet, ensuring everything remained exactly as Amber had left it. Robert converted his home office into an investigation hub, walls covered with maps, timelines, and contact information for the private detectives he'd hired with the family's rapidly depleting savings. "I've got a new lead in Spokane," he would announce over dinner, though Karen had stopped responding with the enthusiastic hope she'd shown in the early weeks. The toll of constant disappointment had begun to wear on her, dark circles permanent fixtures beneath her eyes. At the Miller residence, Diana sat on Sarah's bed most evenings after work, flipping through photo albums of her daughter's life, from gap-toothed kindergarten smiles to awkward middle school portraits to recent team photos. Edward rarely came home, throwing himself into work at Microsoft, often sleeping in his office where he spent nights researching similar cases on his computer. "He thinks if he works hard enough, he can solve this like a coding problem," Diana confided to Patricia during one of their increasingly rare joint visits to the police station for updates. The Vasquez home had become a shrine of sorts. Patricia maintained a constant vigil before an improvised altar with Gabriella's photographs, surrounded by perpetually lit candles and images of saints. Neighbors brought food that often went uneaten, while members of their church took turns sitting with Patricia, praying the rosary in Spanish. Thanksgiving arrived, bringing with it the first of many painful holiday milestones. The three families gathered at the Wilson home for a somber dinner, their shared tragedy temporarily overcoming the growing differences in how each was handling their grief. Conversation was minimal, the silence broken only by the sound of utensils against plates and occasional murmured requests to pass dishes. As Christmas approached, the national media interest in the case waned, replaced by newer tragedies and scandals. Edward Miller refused to participate in any holiday celebrations, while the Wilsons and Vasquez families went through the motions for the sake of extended family who didn't know how else to help. In January of 1998, Karen Wilson suffered a breakdown during an interview with Dateline NBC when the host asked what she thought had happened to the girls. "They're alive," she screamed, before Robert quickly escorted her off camera. The segment aired nationally, bringing another brief flurry of tips that ultimately led nowhere. The new semester at Eastlake High School began with a memorial ceremony. 3 trees were planted on campus, a red maple for Gabriella, an oak for Amber, and a cherry tree for Sarah. Coach Hartman, who had barely spoken publicly since the disappearance, addressed the assembled students and faculty. "Not a day passes without me questioning what I could have done differently," he said, voice breaking. "Should I have accompanied the girls to the store? Should I have enforced a stricter curfew? This doubt is my constant companion, as is the hope that one day we'll know the truth." He concluded by announcing his resignation after 15 years as coach, unable to continue training without his stars. By April 1998, Agent Morse called a meeting with the 3 families to deliver difficult news. "We're not abandoning the investigation," she assured them in the small conference room at Seattle FBI headquarters, "but we need to be realistic about our resources and the likelihood of new evidence emerging without fresh leads." 6 months after the disappearance, when active searches had virtually ceased and FBI briefings had been reduced to monthly check-ins, an unexpected discovery reignited the investigation. Raymond Fletcher, a former security guard who had worked at the regional championship and disappeared immediately after the event, had just been arrested in Nevada for attempting to kidnap a teenage girl in a shopping mall parking lot. Agent Morse leaned forward across the table, spreading out the arrest report from Nevada. Raymond Fletcher, 46 years old, worked security at multiple regional cheerleading events over the past 5 years, including the Portland Championship. The family stared at the grainy mugshot of a heavy-set man with close-cropped hair and small, deep-set eyes. Something about his gaze, flat, almost reptilian, sent a chill through the room. "He disappeared the day after the girls vanished," Morse continued. "Didn't show up for his final shift, left his hotel room with personal items still inside, and his supervisor couldn't reach him. We didn't flag him initially because he was just one of dozens of event staff who weren't directly interviewed." In May of 1998, 2 FBI agents traveled to Carson City, Nevada, to interrogate Fletcher. They sat across from him in a sterile interrogation room, watching his face for any reaction as they placed photographs of Gabriella, Amber, and Sarah on the metal table. "Never seen these girls before," Fletcher stated flatly, pushing the photos away with his handcuffed wrists. "I worked security at dozens of events with hundreds of teenagers. They all look the same to me." The lead agent slid across a photo of the Portland Hilton. "You left town suddenly the morning after these girls disappeared. Why?" Fletcher's expression remained impassive. "Got a call about my mother being sick in Boise. Had to leave right away." Back at FBI headquarters in Portland, Agent Morse reviewed the toll booth records showing Fletcher's car on the interstate between Portland and Boise the morning after the disappearance. The timestamp read 6:27 a.m., early enough that he could have been involved in the abduction the previous night and still made it to the toll booth by morning. "It's not an alibi, but it's not evidence either," she told her team, frustration evident in her voice. "Without physical evidence connecting him to the girls, we can't hold him on our case." By 2001, the approaches of the three families had diverged significantly. The Vasquez living room had evolved into an impressive command center with maps, photos, and newspaper clippings covering every wall. Juan, having found work with a sympathetic contractor, spent evenings making calls to Spanish-language radio stations across the West Coast, keeping Gabriella's story alive in Latino communities. One evening in February, Diana Miller sat alone in Sarah's untouched bedroom, holding a stuffed wolf her daughter had won at a carnival. Down the hall, she heard the front door open and close as Edward collected more of his belongings. Their marriage, strained before the disappearance, had finally broken under the weight of their divergent grieving processes. "I can't stay in this shrine anymore," Edward had told her the week before. "Every inch of this house is saturated with absence." Within months, Edward had transformed himself completely. He abandoned his successful career at Microsoft, completing accelerated training as a private investigator. His apartment in Seattle contained only the essentials, except for the wall covered with case files of missing persons, Sarah's prominently displayed in the center. In the Wilson household, Karen's anxiety had become debilitating. The medication bottles on her nightstand multiplied monthly, and she rarely ventured beyond their driveway. One morning, while organizing Amber's closet, a ritual she performed weekly, her hands trembled so violently that pill bottles scattered across the immaculately maintained carpet. "I can feel her sometimes," Karen whispered to Robert during one of his increasingly brief visits home. "She's trying to tell us something." Robert, perpetually exhausted from crisscrossing the country following tenuous leads, managed only a weary nod. His once successful banking career had been reduced to part-time consulting that funded his relentless search and the private investigators he still employed. In summer of 2002, the Vasquez family faced another battle. Their temporary visas had expired years earlier, and immigration proceedings threatened deportation. In a crowded courtroom, their attorney argued for a special humanitarian exemption due to their daughter's high-profile disappearance. Sending Mr. and Mrs. Vasquez back to Mexico would effectively end their participation in the ongoing investigation of their daughter's case, the lawyer argued. It would be a second trauma inflicted on parents who have already endured the unimaginable. The judge, moved by their circumstances and the media attention the case had received, granted the exemption, allowing them to begin the process toward permanent residency. At the Kirkland Police Department, Sheriff Dave Cromwell approached retirement age with reluctance. The case had become his obsession, his desk perpetually covered with the 3-inch thick file he reviewed daily. New officers learned quickly not to mention the cheerleader case unless they had fresh insights to offer. "I know there's a file in some drawer with the answers we need," Cromwell confided to Robert Wilson during a rare coffee meeting in Seattle in late 2003. "The problem is that nobody wants to be responsible for a decade-old case with zero progress." By 2007, Edward Miller had built a reputation as a dogged investigator specializing in missing persons cases. His methods were unorthodox but effective, and families across the Pacific Northwest sought his services when official investigations stalled. In February, the news of Raymond Fletcher's suicide in his Nevada prison cell rippled through the fractured investigation. Fletcher, serving time for the attempted kidnapping conviction, had hanged himself with bedsheets, leaving behind a rambling note that mentioned "the three who will never be found" and "secrets that die with me." When Cromwell received a copy of the suicide note, he immediately pushed to formally reopen the investigation. "This is as close to a confession as we're likely to get," he argued to his successor, who remained unconvinced. "It's too vague, Dave," the new sheriff countered. "Fletcher had mental health issues. He could be referring to any number of things, or trying to claim notoriety for something he didn't do." In August 2009, Edward Miller's phone rang at 3 a.m. A shelter coordinator in Phoenix described a confused young woman claiming to be Sarah Miller, rescued from a human trafficking operation. Within hours, Edward was on a plane, followed shortly by Robert Wilson and Juan Vasquez. The hope that surged through the three men dissipated painfully over the following days. While the woman knew surprising details about the girls, DNA tests confirmed what investigators suspected. She was Melissa Jenkins, a 26-year-old woman from Eugene who had disappeared 6 years earlier and suffered from dissociative disorder after years of abuse. On the flight back to Seattle, Edward clutched his chest suddenly, pain radiating down his left arm. The flight attendants administered emergency oxygen, while the pilot diverted to Salt Lake City, where paramedics diagnosed a mild heart attack, the physical manifestation of years of accumulated stress and dashed hopes. In April 2012, almost 15 years after the disappearance, Dave Cromwell's phone rang at 6:15 in the morning. The retired sheriff fumbled for the receiver, instantly alert despite the early hour. "Cromwell," he answered gruffly, "this is Ranger Thomas Blackwood with the U.S. Forest Service in Gifford-Pinchot National Forest," came the deep voice on the line. "I think we found something you'll want to see, Sheriff. It's about your missing cheerleaders." Dave Cromwell's hand tightened around the receiver, his breath catching in his throat. "The cheerleaders, what did you find?" His voice, normally steady after decades in law enforcement, wavered slightly. "You should see this for yourself, Sheriff," Ranger Blackwood replied. "A logger found something unusual. I'll text you the coordinates." Within the hour, Cromwell was driving his weathered SUV along winding forest roads, the dashboard GPS guiding him deeper into Gifford-Pinchot National Forest. His mind raced through possibilities. Had they finally found remains after 15 years? Or was this another false lead that would ultimately devastate the families once more? At a small clearing where several Forest Service vehicles were parked, Cromwell met Ranger Thomas Blackwood, a tall man with a weather-beaten face and solemn eyes. Beside him stood Mike Harrelson, a lumberjack whose rugged appearance contrasted with his visibly shaken demeanor. "It's just through those trees," Blackwood said, leading Cromwell down a narrow path. Mike was surveying this section for a planned cut when he spotted something reflecting sunlight. They emerged into a small clearing where 3 trees stood in perfect triangular formation. Cromwell's heart nearly stopped. Hanging from each tree, suspended about 6 feet above the ground, were 3 plastic-sealed bags. Inside each transparent container was a pristine red cheerleading uniform. "I saw the names," Harrelson said quietly. "That's when I called it in." Cromwell approached slowly, years of investigative discipline momentarily abandoned as emotion overwhelmed him. Through the clear plastic, he could make out the embroidered names: Gabriella, Amber, and Sarah. "Don't touch anything," he instructed, though neither man had made any move to disturb the scene. This is them." Within 4 hours, the clearing had transformed into a full crime scene. Agent Kathleen Morse, specially recalled to the case that had marked her early career, directed FBI technicians with precise efficiency. Yellow crime scene tape created a wide perimeter, and photographers documented every angle of the macabre display. 15 years, Cromwell murmured, standing beside Morse as they watched the evidence team work. 15 years waiting for something concrete. And now we have something, Morse replied, her face tense with concentration. The question is whether it leads us to answers or just more questions. The technicians used specialized equipment to photograph and document the scene before carefully removing the sealed uniforms. Each was placed in a separate evidence container for transport to the FBI laboratory in Quantico. It's like some kind of twisted shrine, Morse observed. The arrangement is too deliberate to be random. These uniforms were meant to be found eventually. While the primary team processed the uniforms, additional agents and forest rangers began searching the surrounding area. Following an overgrown logging road approximately 12 kilometers from the clearing, they discovered an abandoned cabin partially reclaimed by the forest. Morse approached the dilapidated structure cautiously, gun drawn though it was clearly long deserted. Inside, illuminated by flashlight beams, was a disturbing tableau that made even the veteran agent pause. The cabin walls were plastered with newspaper clippings about the disappearance, yellowed with age, but carefully preserved under plastic sheeting. Polaroid photographs showed the 3 unconscious girls wearing the red uniforms found in the trees. A meticulously maintained journal, protected in a waterproof container, contained detailed entries about my perfect wolves and plans to preserve them forever in the beauty of youth. My God, whispered one of the younger agents, turning away from a corner where 3 mattresses lay side by side, chains still attached to the wall behind them. Forensic technicians in full protective gear carefully documented the scene, collecting samples from dark stains on the mattresses. Preliminary testing indicated human blood, though the age of the samples made complete DNA extraction challenging. Back at FBI headquarters in Seattle, the team worked through the night processing the evidence. The preservation of the uniforms was remarkable. Sealed in airtight plastic, they had maintained their vibrant red color and even retained traces of detergent scent. More disturbing was the discovery of hair strands caught in the fabric. Preliminary analysis indicated they matched the characteristics of the 3 missing girls. The implication was inescapable. The girls had worn these uniforms after their disappearance. Found something, called a technician examining items from beneath the cabin's floorboards. She held up a faded receipt for building materials. It's made out to Raymond Fletcher. The connection to Fletcher galvanized the investigation. The man who had committed suicide in prison 5 years earlier now became the primary focus. Records confirmed he had worked security at multiple cheerleading events, including the Portland Championship. 3 days after the discovery, Agent Morse convened a confidential meeting with the 3 families, their first gathering in the same room for years. The tension was palpable as they filed in, each family transformed by 15 years of grief. Robert Wilson, now gray-haired with deep-set wrinkles, held Karen's trembling hand. Edward Miller kept his distance from Diana, while Juan and Patricia Vasquez, aged by sorrow, sat rigidly side by side. What we're about to share is extremely difficult, Morse began, her voice controlled but compassionate. We've found evidence that strongly suggests Raymond Fletcher, the security guard investigated years ago, was indeed responsible for your daughter's disappearance. As Morse presented the findings, with Cromwell occasionally adding context, the silence in the room was broken only by muffled sobs. The photographs of the cabin and uniforms were shown with sensitivity, but nothing could soften their impact. Why now? Edward Miller finally asked, his voice barely recognizable. Why after so much time does someone simply find these uniforms? The answer came through deeper analysis of Fletcher's journal. Apparently, he had organized this display years before, as a kind of disturbed memorial. Evidence suggested Fletcher revisited the location periodically until around 2005, shortly before his arrest in Nevada. One specific passage indicated his intention that the site eventually be discovered, but only when the time is right for the world to know my work. The evidence locker at FBI headquarters held the uniforms in specially sealed containers, their vibrant red color preserved after 15 years in the forest. Technicians worked methodically, extracting every hair, fiber, and trace element that might tell the story of what happened to Gabriella, Amber, and Sarah. For Kathleen Morse, who had dedicated a significant portion of her career to this case, each new discovery felt like both vindication and a fresh wound. The preservation is remarkable, noted the lead forensic analyst, carefully examining a strand of dark curly hair that matched Gabriella's characteristics. Fletcher knew exactly what he was doing with those airtight containers. In the conference room down the hall, Morse prepared her notes for the second meeting with the families. This time, she would need to share the most disturbing details found in Fletcher's journal, information too sensitive for their initial disclosure. She glanced at the clock, 9:30 in the morning. The families would arrive in half an hour. At the Wilson home, Karen stood in front of her bedroom mirror, applying makeup with trembling hands. For the first time in years, she had selected clothing other than her standard house attire, a small gesture of acceptance that something had fundamentally changed. "I don't know if I can hear more," she whispered to Robert, who watched her from the doorway with concern etched across his weathered face. "We need to know, Karen," he replied gently. "After 15 years of questions, we finally have some answers." Across town, Edward Miller sat alone in his apartment, methodically reviewing copies of evidence photographs provided by Morse. His investigator's mind dissected each image, searching for patterns, inconsistencies, anything that might have been overlooked. The retired Microsoft engineer had transformed himself into someone unrecognizable from the man he'd been before Sarah disappeared, his entire existence now defined by absence and search. When his phone rang, Diana's name appeared on the screen, a rare occurrence these days. "I thought we could drive together to the FBI office," she said, her voice tentative. "This feels like something we shouldn't face separately." At the Vasquez household, Patricia knelt before her altar, rosary beads sliding through her fingers as she prayed. 15 years of daily devotion had carved deep grooves into her knees and her heart. Juan stood nearby, watching his wife with a mixture of reverence and sorrow. "Es hora," he said softly. "Time to go." The meeting room at FBI headquarters felt smaller with all three families present. Morse began by explaining what they had learned from deeper analysis of Fletcher's journal. "The entries suggest that Fletcher had been planning this for some time," she explained, her voice professional but gentle. "He had observed the girls at multiple competitions before Portland, developing a particular fixation on Gabriella. The investigation had reconstructed Fletcher's movements on that October night in 1997. Security records confirmed he had been assigned to exterior security during the championship. A witness previously dismissed from the initial investigation, a driver who had been parked near the convenience store, recalled seeing a man helping 3 teenage girls into a white van, assuming he was a father or coach. Phone records we recovered from archives show Fletcher called the Hilton Portland at 9:45 that night, Morse continued, likely confirming the girls' presence at the hotel. Patricia Vasquez gasped softly, gripping Juan's hand as Morse explained how Fletcher had lured the girls, claiming to be security sent to escort them due to a supposed bomb threat at the hotel. The journal described how he had quickly subdued them with incapacitating spray once they entered his vehicle. The evidence suggests he kept them alive at the cabin for approximately 2 weeks, Morse said, her voice faltering slightly as she conveyed this information. The journal indicates she paused, searching for the most humane way to phrase the horrific details. He eventually poisoned them when he realized he couldn't keep them indefinitely and that the search was intensifying. Karen Wilson's face had gone completely white. "No," she whispered, shaking her head. "No, there's no proof. These could be the fantasies of a sick man. Amber could still be out there, needing us." Robert held her tightly as she began to sob, his own eyes flooding with tears he'd held back for 15 years. Edward Miller, ever the analyst, pressed for details. "You're basing this conclusion on writings, not physical evidence. Without bodies, how can we be certain?" Morse exchanged a glance with Cromwell before answering. "Mr. Miller, the journal contains specific details about the disposal of remains that only the perpetrator could know. Fletcher wrote about using Lake Merwin to, in his words, return them to nature." Diana Miller, who had been silent until now, asked in a barely audible voice, "Are you searching the lake?" "A preliminary search with sonar and divers has begun," Morse confirmed. "But Lake Merwin is vast and deep. It may take time, or we may never find physical remains." For the Vasquez family, whose Catholic faith had been both challenged and strengthened by the tragedy, the revelations brought a different kind of closure. "Ahora sabemos que nuestra Gabriela está con Dios," Patricia said quietly, crossing herself. "Now we know our Gabriela is with God. We can begin to say goodbye." That evening, as each family processed the devastating information in their own way, a discovery at Fletcher's storage unit in Tacoma brought another wave of painful evidence. FBI agents uncovered 3 small packages, carefully wrapped and preserved. Inside were personal items: Gabriela's diary, with entries up to the day of disappearance, Amber's lucky bracelet she always wore at competitions, and the small silver wolf pendant Sarah had received from her parents when she joined the cheerleading team. These intimate possessions, kept as trophies by their abductor, provided the final confirmation the families had both feared and secretly hoped for. The question that remained, as they prepared for a joint memorial service in Kirkland, was no longer what happened, but how do we move forward with this terrible certainty? In June of 2012, the FBI convened a press conference to officially announce that Raymond Fletcher was considered responsible for the disappearance of the Kirkland cheerleaders. But as cameras recorded the official statements, a secret operation was being planned. Based on meticulous calculations derived from Fletcher's journal and the weather conditions of October 1997, a specialized team of forensic divers was about to investigate a specific area of Lake Merwin. Dawn broke over Lake Merwin, with a silvery light filtering through the morning mist. The specialized team of forensic divers checked their equipment methodically, the quiet professionalism of their movements belying the gravity of their mission. Agent Morse stood on the shoreline, her face impassive as she watched the team prepare to enter the water. 15 years of searching had led to this moment, guided by the disturbing precision of a dead man's journal. "We'll focus on the coordinates calculated from Fletcher's writings," the lead diver explained, pointing to a map spread across the hood of an FBI vehicle. "Based on currents and his description of the disposal site, we've narrowed the search area to approximately 200 square meters." Morse nodded, her eyes fixed on the placid surface of the lake that had potentially held its secret for a decade and a half. "Good luck," was all she could manage as the team entered the water. Beneath the surface, in the murky depths that light barely penetrated, the divers moved systematically through their search grid. Their powerful underwater lights swept across the lake bottom, illuminating silt, rocks, and the occasional fish. 3 hours into the search, the radio crackled to life. "We found something," came the distorted voice of the lead diver, "concrete blocks with chains, and what appears to be sealed containers." Back in Kirkland, unaware of the lake search, the community gathered for the inauguration of the Three Wolves Memorial. The bronze sculpture depicting 3 female figures in dance-like poses emerged from a flame-shaped base, their flowing forms capturing the essence of youth and movement. Karen Wilson stood supported by Robert, her first public appearance in months. The director of Eastlake High School spoke about legacy and remembrance, while former classmates, now in their 30s, dabbed at tears. As the ceremony concluded, Morse received a call that left her momentarily speechless. She glanced toward the families gathered around the memorial, then made a decision to withhold the information until absolute confirmation was obtained. That morning, while speeches were given and tears shed, forensic technicians in a Seattle laboratory worked in silence, processing what the divers had recovered. 3 days later, Morse convened a private meeting with the families and Sheriff Cromwell. Her normally impassive face showed signs of contained emotion. "The divers recovered human remains from the lake," she announced without preamble. 3 sets of remains, preserved inside sealed plastic containers, anchored to the bottom with concrete weights. The silence that followed was absolute, almost solid in its intensity. Diana Miller broke it first. "Are they our girls? Are you absolutely certain?" "DNA testing has confirmed it. They are Gabriella, Amber, and Sarah," Morse replied, her professional voice finally wavering. "We've found your daughters." The technical details that followed, about the state of preservation due to the hermetically sealed containers, about the recovery process, about subsequent legal procedures, barely registered with those present. A more fundamental truth had finally been confirmed. After 15 years of limbo, the girls could finally rest. In the week that followed, as they prepared for funerals they never had the chance to hold, investigators shared more details about how the crime had been perpetrated, based on physical evidence now available, and Fletcher's written confessions found with his journal. Fletcher had apparently observed the girls during several regional competitions, developing an obsession particularly focused on Gabriella. Working as security at the Portland event, he monitored their movements throughout the weekend, even making an anonymous call to their room to confirm their presence at the hotel. When he saw them leaving alone on Sunday night, Fletcher approached them on their way back from the convenience store, pretending to be an event security guard sent to escort them due to an alleged bomb threat at the hotel. Convinced to enter his van for evacuation, the girls were quickly subdued with incapacitating spray. Fletcher took them directly to his prepared cabin in the forest. There, he kept them prisoner for approximately 2 weeks, forcing them to wear the reserve uniforms he had stolen from the team van while taking photographs. The journal entries suggested he alternated between moments of apparent lucidity, when he despaired over what he had done, and periods of delusion, where he fantasized that the girls were his wolves who had chosen to stay with him. At the end of October, 3 separate funerals were held, according to each family's traditions. The Vasquez family opted for a traditional Catholic service, with Gabriella's casket covered in red and white flowers, the colors of her team. The Wilsons held an outdoor ceremony in the park where Amber used to run every morning. The Millers chose an intimate service at the local chapel, with only close family and friends. 1 week later, the 3 families gathered for a private farewell ritual on the shores of Lake Washington. Patricia Vasquez had suggested the ceremony, inspired by a Mexican tradition of releasing flowers on water to guide lost spirits. At dusk, Robert and Karen Wilson, Juan and Patricia Vasquez, and Edward and Diana Miller, peacefully reunited for the first time in years, placed 3 small floating lanterns on the water, each carrying a photograph and personal items of their daughters. "Quince años," murmured Patricia, watching the lights slowly drift from the shore. "But finally they are at peace." Edward Miller, who had dedicated more than half his adult life to searching for his daughter, placed a hesitant arm around Diana's shoulders. After years of separation, the case's resolution had opened space for a new kind of connection between them. Not a return to what they were before, but something different, forged in shared pain, and the healing that now, finally, could begin. For Karen Wilson, the acceptance process had been the most difficult. For years, she had clung to the belief that Amber might be alive somewhere. Now, watching the lantern with her daughter's photo float away, she whispered, "Goodbye, my love. Forgive me for taking so long to let you go." The 3 lanterns drifted farther into the darkening waters of Lake Washington, their lights growing more distant, like receding stars. Sheriff Cromwell watched from a respectful distance, his weathered face etched with the culmination of 15 years' dedication. When Robert Wilson noticed him and gestured for him to join the group, Cromwell hesitated before approaching. "You never gave up on them," Robert said, squeezing the sheriff's shoulder. "When everyone else moved on, you kept searching." "It was my job," Cromwell replied simply. "No," Juan Vasquez interjected, his English still halting even after all these years. "No era solo trabajo, era corazón, era like father for them." As sunset painted the sky with the same red and gold tones as the Eastlake Wolves' uniforms, Kathleen Morse silently approached the group. In her hands was a folder containing the official case closure documents, the culmination of 15 years of investigation. "I think this belongs to you," she said, handing the folder to Robert Wilson. "There's nothing more the FBI or any agency can do. The case is officially closed." Edward Miller opened the folder and briefly leafed through the documents before closing it again. 15 years of our lives reduced to an official report," he commented without bitterness, just a tired observation. "No," Diana responded, looking at the lanterns that now resembled distant stars on the darkened surface of the lake. 15 years of love, of hope, of never giving up on them. The report is just paper. What matters is that they can rest now, and so can we." In the months that followed, each family found their own path to deal with final grief. The Vasquez family, with support from Kirkland's Latino community, established a scholarship in Gabriela's name for young immigrants interested in sports. The Wilsons became dedicated activists for reforming security protocols at youth sporting events. Edward Miller, using his experience as a private investigator, helped develop a training program for police officers on missing persons cases. By November, the Vasquez family hosted a ceremony at St. Joseph's Church to announce the Gabriela Vasquez Scholarship Fund. Nearly 200 people gathered to hear Juan speak, his voice steady as he addressed the crowd. "My daughter loved to fly," he said, gesturing to a large photograph of Gabriela in mid-jump. "Now she helps other young people fly too." Patricia, seated in the front row, clutched a small album containing newspaper clippings of the case's resolution, not as a reminder of tragedy, but as evidence that closure had finally come. Across town, Robert and Karen Wilson sat in a conference room with event security specialists and school administrators from across the state. The PowerPoint presentation displayed on the wall showed a comprehensive set of new protocols inspired by the tragedy. "No student should ever leave a competition venue without paired supervision," Robert explained, his banker's precision returning to his voice after years of desperate searching. "These simple measures could have prevented what happened to our daughters." Karen, who had begun therapy to process her long-delayed grief, nodded in agreement. Her eyes, though still sad, showed clarity that had been absent for over a decade. At the State Police Academy, Edward Miller stood before 20 new recruits, his posture straight, despite the physical toll the years of searching had taken on his body. Diana sat in the back of the classroom, watching her ex-husband with newfound respect. "The first 48 hours are critical," Edward emphasized, pointing to a timeline on the whiteboard. "But that doesn't mean you ever stop looking. Sometimes answers come 15 years later, and families deserve that closure no matter how long it takes." Eastlake High School, which had been haunted by tragedy for years, finally found a way to honor the girls' memory without being defined by their loss. Former coach Hartman returned as a volunteer consultant, helping revitalize the cheerleading program he had abandoned after losing his stars. In the spring of 2013, when a new generation of cheerleaders qualified for the Northwest Regional Championship, they wore a small emblem on their uniforms, 3 silver stars representing Gabriela, Amber, and Sarah. Before boarding the bus to Portland, the girls stopped briefly at the Three Wolves Memorial for a moment of reflection. In his office in Kirkland, Dave Cromwell finally removed the large marked map and photographs of the 3 cheerleaders that had dominated his wall for a decade and a half. In their place, he hung a single framed photograph, the 3 lanterns floating on Lake Washington at sunset. "Case closed," he murmured to himself, briefly touching the frame before turning off the light and closing the door. At Patricia Vasquez's bedside, beside a wooden crucifix and an ever-lit candle, rested Gabriella's recovered diary. She read it occasionally, finding comfort in her daughter's enthusiastic words about her dreams and hopes. The final entry, written on the morning of the disappearance, ended with a phrase Patricia had memorized, repeating it like a mantra in her most difficult moments. "No matter what happens today, we're already winners. Amber, Sarah, and I promised we'll stay together forever, no matter what life brings. We are the Eastlake Wolves, and wolves always protect their pack." Somehow, even in the deepest tragedy, that promise had been fulfilled. As the 3 trees planted in their memory, now grown taller and stronger, swayed gently in the spring breeze, their roots had intertwined beneath the soil, just as the lives of Gabriella, Amber, and Sarah would remain forever connected in the memories of those who loved them and searched for them for so long.